Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Episode 2 of Season 3 of the Social Pillar.
Hey guys, how you doing?
We're here.
We're back.
And we're ready
to
that's
talk.
enough of that, I think. Welcome, everybody, and welcome us to The Social Pillar, an ongoing conversation about the value of role-playing games and their crafts, cultures, and communities in our world. As always, before we get started, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are coming to you from and the land that you are hopefully watching and enjoying us from. I'm personally coming to you from Dara country, and we would like to acknowledge traditional owners and pay our respects to elders past and present, and also to extend that respect to any First Nations people who are watching. The original storytellers always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And with that, we're talking to you about things and stuff. And
Creative things.
because we were awfully clever this time, we've even got a title that matches what we're talking about. Jared, what are we talking about?
We're talking about things that are out in the world, these creative things that people put out there, art forms in terms of literature, paintings, film, that inspire us, that are out there, these great works. I can't think of any in particular that have really influenced modern. No, but we're talking about.
It's going to be a short stream.
It's going to be a short stream. Lord of the Rings did a lot of the work. Thank you for coming. No, we want to talk about things that we've experienced that have actually directly influenced our role-playing games, how we approach things, the story ideas, the twists, turns, but also just anything creative that maybe is adjacent. So that's what we want to talk about, and how you can possibly take inspiration from these things. So that's what we want to talk about tonight.
Open up to a chat out there, guys. If you have some, particularly, we were talking about this in preparing for this week about reading and the things that we've read across many different forms. We're trying to avoid digital wherever we can and just talk about the reading things like books, maybe paintings, but blogs also come into it, magazines, that kind of thing, novels, non-fiction, documentary, that kind of stuff that help us run games. So chat, if you're out there, would love to hear from you. Welcome, Kit Kat. Good to see you there. And everyone else who's out there on the socials, we look forward to seeing you on chat. What are the books, the novels, the reading materials, maybe even paintings or other things that you've picked up from to help you with your RPG games? And do you want to take us away, Jared? Where do we begin our journey?
Well, I think, you can't really ignore a great piece of literature like Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
If we're talking directly traditional Dungeons and Dragons and all of this kind of fantasy, there was a huge influence. There was a lawsuit with terminology and naming of particular races.
Wait. Can we just go back real quick to the lawsuit?
Treants.
Good point.
Why? Why was there a lawsuit? Was it because there was
hobbits?
The use and
direct
hobbits.
inspiration?
Yeah, and there was direct use of Hobbit. So between TSR and Tolkien.
TSR, the original company created by Gary Gygax and co.
Yeah.
Who did D&D,
So what we're talking about is direct inspiration. I think you have picked the seminal inspirational work.
It's the OG. Yes, I do have a model where we can talk about when I want. We'll get into blogs, but yes, like I think that with the originating pre-D&D chainmail, which was a gaming system to be able to name a group of individuals from a war campaign, because wargaming was bigger back in the day, and these guys were inspired to tell a more personal story about what these people were doing. And then fantasy rules were added, little toys and little dragon figures, and all of these things were presented for the players to fight, and fantasy and magic became a part of that. And it was a direct parallel to Lord of the Rings in so many ways. So, we just have to think, it being a beautiful piece all on its own, but also this hobby has blossomed, and many other beautiful pieces of fantasy literature and film have been made as well. So.
Can I ask a question? How have you personally been influenced by Lord of the Rings?
That's a good question.
Because obviously it's an influence on the whole thing.
How long have you God.
When did you read it first?
Yeah.
Teenager, like high school. It's been a long time since I've read it.
Yeah.
I've not touched the Silmarillion. I would love to actually fully expand into that. My modern consumption of it is like, long YouTube videos where they talk about what if Gandalf had the ring, kind of a thing. But I would say kind of similarly to that is like, what if Gandalf having the ring is like, well, that's such a cool way to do that. Like it the ring wraiths are such a beautiful embodiment of like pure, purposeful, corrupt evil, and they have a purpose and a master, and they have no remorse or any feelings really, you know. And so if you
they're
want
enslaved.
to just pay attention, and that's it. They have a master. They've been bound into this contract, so you can just take that apply that to a devil in Avernus that they meet in a campaign, and suddenly you've got this creature who doesn't quite understand what humanity is, and maybe you can turn that and twist it on its. So already you just take one iconic thing, and then I don't know where my other book is, but I have a whole definite. Like, it's literally a definition of every place, name, location, and it tells you who these people are, gives you history, and it's that I actually use more. Yeah, so all of the terminology in Middle Earth, that is truly inspiring, because there might be an island that's mentioned once, and it's like, okay, well, this was done, and then this race was there, and that happened, and the goblins and the giants, and it's everything. So there's such a breadth to that.
How about we talk about Lord of the Rings first, then, and between us, and then expand out to fiction from there? So
sounds great.
So for you guys, absolutely.
How about you?
I thought it was actually really interesting. So I actually am not a huge fan of high fantasy in my games, which I would say Lord of the Rings is. But I wanted to pick up on that point that you made, Jared, that you were talking about the complexity of the characters. So the ring wraiths, for example, because one thing that I really value in my games is there's rarely a black and white. There is rarely bad guys who are just purely evil. It is individuals, it is characters that are in a situation and doing what they think is best in that situation, which could objectively be viewed as evil, but there is a motivation. So I think the inspiration that I would pull from Lord of the Rings, and not all of Tolkien's characters are complex, but a lot of them are, is that idea of characterization and making it a complex character that has a story. And Tolkien has worlds and stories for all of his characters. And I think that's probably the biggest influence rather than a direct influence.
When did you read it? Did you read it, The Lord of the Rings?
My mum read it to me when I was a little girl, and it was my nighttime reading. Yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
She read the whole thing.
Storytelling at its peak. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Wow. It was great. So it's like a little core memory of mine. I was like curled up in bed with my cup of tea, because as a child I drank tea before bed. Let's not explore that. But it was great. So that's sort of my exposure. Thank you, Auntie Mimi. Yes, go mum.
Shout out to Thea's mum.
This is
OMG mum.
Yes.
That storytelling, that's fantastic. I remember we talked a bit about this in the prep for this today about Scholastic, when you get books from school, and you used to that was the best, and to be able to just lose yourself in like what am I going to get, because you couldn't get it much. And The Hobbit was one of the first things I got, and that was, I think I was in third grade. I was in third grade at that point, and there was actually I remember there was even an audio book or something from school that I listened to. That was like the earliest audio books on a tape.
I had to flip the tapes over.
Yeah, and but I read it first and I loved it, and then got into Choose Your Own Adventure, and then that led into Fighting Fantasy, which is an example like this one. Love these. It's like Choose Your Own Adventure, but for D&D players. Before you play D&D, it's definitely for more kids. These were a bit darker, actually, and I loved it for that. Each of the books of Fighting Fantasy were fantastic. That's one of the guys, Steve Jackson, who's still around, and they just released a 40th anniversary thing last year for this, because it's still very popular. But this one in particular, most of them were standalone, but this series was like 4 books that linked together into this massive epic mission that you're on. You mentioned before, Jared, Lone Wolf was a big influence for you, which was similar.
And if anyone wants to try them, there's actually apps. You can actually download an app to your phone, and it's fantastic.
Are you serious?
And if you want to try the Lone Wolf, and it's fantastic. It's like straight up
solo adventures.
I am now downloading it on my phone. I'll catch you guys in about 10 minutes.
Fighting Fantasy also has big
you think it'll take 10 minutes?
No, I'm going to start playing. It'll be like, what?
But you said something, Thea, as well about Lord of the Rings and about the complexity of characters. And when you've got characters like Boromir, who's like clearly being corrupted, but he redeems himself and is so, and it's so sad when he dies because you're like, he was on the way. And it's like, they did such a good job in the films, I have to say. But, but for me, actually, also Frodo, just him and going through his journey to the end, and Sam, of course, and that relationship. But Frodo, when you find out later on that Tolkien was, of course, influenced by his experiences in the war and losing young friends and the effects of, shell shock and all that kind of thing, which you see is in the book. You can sense that. And it's in The Hobbit, but less so because it was earlier and when it was a kid's book.
Less
you can
so
sense
in The
that
Hobbit.
it's hinted at, and people who have been lost to war and they were just ordinary people, and that Frodo could never come back from that, and that was was like powerful, and that was an influence for me too. I love the more complex characters, and that has again really influenced the way that I want to have stories in the games that I run as well. That even the most evil things that are there have a purpose and a reason. It may not be good, it may not be healthy, it may not be supportive of your community, but they have a reason for it, and that's why it's compelling. So it's like, how do you combat that? So anyway, that's pretty deep, but that's exactly a big influence for me too.
It's actually interesting. So Loz has just come up in chat with Raymond D. Feast Magician, and when we had our chat, we didn't mention that, but absolutely that's an inspirational book as well that I hadn't thought of.
I'm not familiar.
You're not.
That's a really good one. Definitely.
Now, give me about 3 seconds, and very good.
Let's talk about the other
fantasy style.
Let's talk about some other books
set in the world of Midkemia.
How about you, Thea? What other fictional references?
So I think that there's, let's not judge. There's a lot of words that I've said in my head and seen written, and then I hear someone else pronounce them, and I'm like, I've been wrong for a long time. But so sort of like the Raymond V. Feast Magician is something that I read, and I think there was the Belgariad and the Malloreon. They were probably the longest. That's the series I remember. See, Malloreon, words in my head. I remember reading that when I was in primary school. So we had it in the school library, and you could take out 1 or 2 books, and I remember each week going back and getting the next book. And that was good. But I actually had another thought, since we're talking about characters as well, is Ursula Le Guin. The Magician.
I haven't even gotten into it yet, and everyone raves about it. And I should.
It is a really interesting series. And just as we've been talking and I'm thinking about it, probably the Belgariad and the Malloreon less so, but certainly Wizard of Earthsea, they have character complexities. And the whole Wizard of Earthsea series. There are complex characters with muddied motivations. That's a tongue twister. And it's not simple. And I think that's what appealed to me, is that there is no there's no evildoers. It's not, well, there are, but there's grey areas. And people have motivations and think they're doing the right thing that might turn out to be the wrong thing. But nobody's set out to do bad.
It's appealing, isn't it? There's something it's like, it's really easy to go, we go in there and dungeon bash and hit and kill and all that. And that bizarrely never really appealed to me. It was kind of fun for about, when I was a kid, and just to be able to work out what you can do. But books like that.
Well, I've realised as well, when I design encounters, I steer away from like the traditional sort of evil, oh, you've got an evil hag or you've got an evil band of goblins. I'm like, no, you don't have an evil band of goblins. You have a tribe of goblins that are trying to live their life. And there's people encroaching on their land and they're objecting to that in the only way they know how. How do you resolve that? If I do have encounters for lower level characters, which are designed just, for people to understand mechanics, I usually choose constructs or I choose insects. And or like things that are and even the insects are kind of innocent. They're just doing what they do. So there's that kind of decision. Okay, it's the mosquito in my room. Do I kill it? Do I let it go? Well, I'm going to kill it, but I'm going to feel bad about it. But yeah, and so I think that has, even just as we're talking now, influenced me more than I thought it had, is that I don't like setting up an encounter that we're going to kill the bad guys, because to me that's not fun, and I'm not sure why.
It shouldn't always be about that. And the beauty of the game of role-playing is you have options, you can do anything, and you can make it work in the approach that you find most fun. So players get to choose, and the dungeon master can, as you've obviously engineered and you've realized that you do, Thea, is you set up encounters to be approachable in many different ways. And I feel like you pick that up as DM logic, because I guess basic DM logic is put a challenge in the way. A lot of the rules are combat based generally for role playing games, but it doesn't have to be. You can always engineer.
Yeah,
it's funny how things have slightly been shifting. There's definitely, like, wargaming has been around for a long time and it's evolved in many ways. D&D at its basis had some of that, but it was always meant to be something that steered away from that. And it's funny that in recent years there have been a lot more role-playing games that have worked on the social aspect and what you get out of it, and milestones and like Blades in the Dark is so story-based, which I haven't even played yet.
We need to play that. We need to. My birthday's coming up. I want to play it for my birthday. We need to find someone to run it. You're out there.
But we are drifting away. But the whole idea is that idea of the complexity. So, Jared, for you, what are some of the other fictional sort of like novels, stories that really influenced you?
There is a series by Peter V. Brett called The Demon Cycle, and
I haven't read it.
It's there was a book on the shelf in high school. It has some vivid intimacy in it and graphic violence, so it probably shouldn't have been on a high school bookshelf, but whatever.
Appealing to teens everywhere.
Yeah, it's very appealing. Very appealing to the teens. But so the author has created this interesting dynamic world, and I've always said with world building, if you've got like pre-established rules, you can explain away a lot of stuff, right? So in this world, magic exists, demons exist. Demons have been driven to the core by humans, race of men across the continent, across the globe, but it's really on this continent, like most sort of things. And different races and pockets of civilization now exist because men got lazy, they got complacent, and they had driven these beasts to the core and risen unhindered to an age of technology, and they forgot about magic. So when the demons regained strength and they came back and they rose from the core, they decimated these human races, and they were driven to their forts and to their bare means of survival, because every night these demons rise. They can't rise in summer. But our characters are now living in this world where they've got basic magic, and this is in the forms of wards. So the first book is called The Painted Man, and you follow Arlen Bales, the main protagonist, who eventually becomes this man who is tattooed in these wards that are not only defensive, like most of civilization has, but actually offensive. And that's the story. You have possibly read this book, but the reason that is actually so
pretty big.
Yeah, it's a pretty big series, but the reason that was actually so inspiring is because not only do you follow Arlen, but you also follow Roger and Leisha. And these are characters from different parts of the world, and from chapter to chapter, their journeys, because you follow them from childhood, they you get origin story, which is wonderful. And then they quickly become teens and young adults. And then that's when the journey really kicks off, because they all get together. So Leisha's a herbalist from a small backward village. Roger is from the big city. He is I think it's jongleur or jongler is the word. Jester, a bard, and trains. His name's Roger Halfgrip.
Particularly like a full kind of character, isn't it?
Yeah, like a court jester, very much so. Yeah. And he's called Halfgrip because he lost 2 of his fingers in his tragic story. Anyway, so all of these characters go through a bunch of stuff, but they come together because a town is in threat. And then as the books go on, the world gets bigger. And Arlen is this messenger who travels from city to city, braving the roads at night. So it's kind of like a D&D. You have it's like a D&D.
It's like a D&D. Let's do a D&D.
It's like a role-playing party.
D&D. It's works.
It becomes like a role-playing party where these characters do come together and synergize, and then more characters come into the fold. And it does become far more about more and more characters as the time goes on. The Daylight War being my favorite book, because the proud desert people come to take the entire land back because they feel like they have the right, because they're the only ones who actually fought them all through the fall. And anyway, so
clearly love it, man.
Love it.
Hello there, Bacillus. We are talking books that have inspired us. Welcome in. Always like time chatters.
Bacillus. Well, I'll just quickly say on the Lord of the Rings thing, part of the biggest influence for me out of that, other than the characterization things, and because I know we're going to probably head off into another version of this topic in a second, but
how unlike us.
I know a segue.
To wrap up on my part of the fiction section, unless anyone else wants to, I absolutely love the maps. I am a cartophile. Would that be it? Like for cartography?
Yes.
Oh, maps. You love maps. Yes.
Cartographophile, I guess you could say it. So basically, I absolutely love maps, and I swear those books that because he drew them as well, so I was very influenced. And I love them. I love having really great maps. I know that every map is a story. Whoever wrote it is a perspective of it as well, from who's drawing it, so that's why I love putting those into campaigns. And I did learn Elven for a while. I did know it, and I knew Dwarven for a while, and I absolutely loved it. So I love language, and he had a massive love for language as well, and I love that as an influence for the different cultural kind of ways of looking at things and the world. And so that's why some, cultures have 10 different words for the same thing, whereas we have one. And it's like, I love that idea because there's such a wealth and diversity of ways of looking at the world and why people see things differently. And that's why sometimes misunderstandings occur. So that was huge for me. Really briefly on a fiction that also inspired me, though, that goes away from that. We could talk about a whole bunch of different things. But in terms of fantasy, I mentioned there's horror it linked to, because Remini Feast, as you mentioned, that kind of links into horror a little bit too. That goes there. Stephen King was a big influence. I'm not going to talk about that as much. But there's some fantasy elements there and some dark fantasy elements. I won't even go into the Dark Tower because that's a whole thing for anyone who loves that. What I wanted to talk about was another contemporary author, horror author, Clive Barker, and his stuff massively influenced because there was a lot more of that fantastic mythological kind of influence and deep characterization that I loved, very in some ways similar to Stephen King. But there's one book in particular, Weave World. If you haven't read it as a fantasy, oh my God, it's amazing.
Amazing. I haven't read it, but oh my God, am I going to?
All his stuff is set in England, and this is set in London, and it just feels real. But he finds this guy who finds this carpet in this old abandoned kind of warehouse sort of thing, and it a bit falls off, and it has beautiful, like a Persian carpet with beautiful images of people and animals and buildings and all this kind of thing. And he finds out that it was actually a refuge for these people who were trying to escape from this evil that was coming after them. And they used their magic and magic was lost to the world because they didn't get to share it anymore. But these evils start coming back in. and the whole thing eventually erupts. I won't say how. It's amazing. Very adult as well. Yeah.
That actually sounds, that's very similar to a Doctor Who story arc where the Time Lord's hidden a painting.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Just because you were talking about that, I just realised. Interesting. But, I mean, that just shows how in any kind of fantasy fiction there's all this interplay, and we always sort of using stories to tell other stories. And speaking of segues, Vasilis actually mentioned in the chat that there's a DM that used local information, local lore to incorporate into story lore, and placing that a local area called Red Hill and made it the site of a bloody battle, which I think is fantastic and actually is a nice segue for us to move not just about fiction that has influenced our gameplay, but other things that influence the way that we play. I think we're talking more about how we design worlds, because we do tend to have quite that kind of game master, dungeon master perspective. But that's a great story, by the way, Vasilis, and I think your DM's amazing.
See, that's just brilliant.
Yeah. But what other things have inspired you guys in your storytelling that might be that are similar to sort of narratives and stories but aren't just books? What other? Because I've got stuff, but I'm conscious that I don't want to steal all the conversation, just the bulk of it. But what's inspired you that isn't a book?
Well, how about you, Jared, first?
Something that is a direct influence on role-playing is a blog that I follow. It's called roleplayingtips.com, run by a fine gentleman called John Fore, a Canadian gentleman who has put together thousands of articles, a wonderful site with a bunch of tools. Thank you for the follow. I've only just got the notification that I've heard somewhere. But sorry, John.
21 episodes in, we're still getting the technology.
Yeah. But yeah, he has a wonderful newsletter that comes through, and he has something beautiful to read every so often. I think it's weekly, but he has thousands of those. His blog is full of all of these really, really great things like, hey, maybe you want to up the horror this session. And it's just stuff that you can pretty much scroll through and go, that sounds great. And you can try and apply these things, or just read through, because I find a lot of his stuff you can just kind of make work, and he just thinks with such an open mind and with such a general approach, and he'll give examples from when he's done it and how it influenced and stuff. So it's really well thought out. He's constantly developing his methodologies. He does have some paid products. I'm not promoting him because all of his blog is incredible, but I have paid for his campaign wizardry thing, because I like to look at how different game masters approach different things. And my little note that I wrote for myself is it does give us a glimpse into other games, other play styles and methods for running. Because if you only ever play for the same group of people as the DM and nobody else DMs, and you don't try anything else, and you're only one run system, hey, you're having a good time. But there's so much connectivity out there in terms of the internet and our ability to communicate our ideas, like this show, because we should be looking at all these different perspectives. We can't possibly play enough games with all these people. And so just by osmosis, I'm going to call it, by interacting with other DMs and their games and their approaches, like we have this beautiful platform for, we get to be inspired. So John Fore, that's a beautiful blog. Just to kind of a soft segue from hardcore literature into some light but incredibly useful reading. Ian, what about yourself?
It's a good point, because I mean, this is also about running the game, and that you've got base handbooks for any role-playing game that you're going to have as a kind of a baseline, but it's the in-between stuff. It's the stuff where you want to get also just inspiration for, I want to try this. And if you just look, the wealth of stuff you can look up online now in terms of articles is phenomenal, because so many people are now playing. Like you can look, I was going to mention, you said about zines online, like you've got Dicebreaker and Polyhedron are really great. They've got some there. I've been looking at Screen Rant, because they also do a lot about film.
I really like their stuff.
Yeah. And they link across to role-playing games a lot too. So it's interesting about that crossover that comes through there. But I won't get too much into those because there's so many that we can talk about. Some that have been turned into books. One of them is, which we've talked about before, The Lazy Dungeon Master. Really handy information, like a core rule book for many people, or at least a milestone, what's it called? A cornerstone, basically, to just get the basics of how you can make it simpler to run games and to set up so you don't have to do all that work.
All that work.
That's it. It's like work smarter, not harder kind of thing. Yeah.
Can I jump off that for one of the things that inspires me?
Dude.
So I, and you may have picked up from some of the things that I talk about and the way I talk is about characters, is characterization and backstory is really important to me. I am also a person that potentially has ADHD. I don't know. We'll talk about that later. But I sometimes don't have time to sit down and write long, involved character stories, backstories. But one of the things that inspires me and helps me jump off is paintings. So classical artworks, generally classical artwork. It's not because I'm a snob and think that I thought it was cool before it was cool. I just find that there is a level of complexity in those. So there's a couple of, and we should have set this up as a thing to show people, but there's a couple of paintings in particular that I find fascinating, and I can just have that in my DM notes that will help me tell the story of a character. So there's one in particular, and I recommend anyone in chat or anyone listening to the podcast when we do those. There's one called the Arnolfini Wedding, or the Arnolfini Painting, and it is Arnolfini Portrait, and it is so interesting. It's a priest standing there with a very obviously pregnant woman, and you can see the artist in a mirror behind them, and just the story that you can tell for jumping off from that, I find fascinating. There's the girl with a pearl earring, which is a picture of a girl looking back over her shoulder. And again, there's a level of ambiguity there that helps me tell stories. And often when I'm trying to come up with backstories or even come up with history and lore, I'll have a look at different classical paintings. And that's, when you talk about narratives, often people don't think about that as a traditional narrative media. But paintings and images, I find, as a DM, incredibly inspirational.
Well, the adage of a picture tells 1,000 words is so appropriate because it can't sometimes put into words some of the things that are trying to be explored. It's amazing, particularly if you look at some classical paintings too, about the level of emotion that some of the characters are portraying, and you can see layers there, which is fantastic. The clothes they wear, how they're wearing it, the way they're looking at the different characters or to the painter, the little things the painter includes in the painting to suggest other things that are going on. It's funny because I'm more and more, I've realized over time when it comes to me pulling a character together, I really like to have an image to start from because that gives me the hook of why I want to play this character rather than I used to be like, oh God, I want to play a wizard and I can do this as well, because it's like trying those things out. And the older I've gotten, it's more about who is this person? What is it? And I swear images really help because it's like, that's what I want to explore, that kind of. So, I agree. Images are fantastic.
Basilius has also brought up Whistler's Mother. Also a fantastic painting.
So true.
So so that's one of the things. Loz has also brought up some sort of fictional self-help books as an inspiration, and we hadn't thought about that, but 100% some of those things. There was a book that I read as a child, probably shouldn't have read it as a child, which was written from the perspective of a devil. Far too many adult concepts for a primary school child to be reading.
Hey, it's all Grimm fairy tales, they were good for us when we were kids.
But there's so many different things that hilarious kind of thing, because not every campaign's serious, not every game is, we've got complex characters dealing with deep moral ambiguity. Sometimes it's just a bit of fun. Sometimes you have a game where one of your characters revives someone simply to shoot them with an arrow. Maybe a game that I may have played last week.
We'll explore that.
We'll explore that another time.
The hero's episode.
I was thinking about, because we talk about images, and I was thinking for people with dyslexia, for example, as well, who are also more visual. And I know a lot of people who prefer to have imagery because it helps actually with understanding the world. So this is about the different ways we take information and also can share it, which I love. I love sound. I'm a massive fan of music and sound and the way things that I can hear. So that's an influence too. So sometimes, like, I have characters that are like important ones. I will try and find a song that I go, that's them. And it'd be an easy hook for me to then go, yep, this is who they are. And that helps me keep me on that groove of that character. That's a lot of fun, but that was going in a direction I wasn't planning to. I was going to talk briefly about
going off plans.
I was going to talk about Kickstarter is a wonderful thing because, you've got the basic rule books, but you've also got people want to be able to write their own stuff. This is so beyond Wizards of the Coast who write for Dungeons and Dragons, the official material. There's so many people who write for Drive-Thru RPG and have amazing stuff on there. And also for Kickstarter. And one of them I found was this awesome book, which is The Herbal Journal of Cicely Longbottom. It is so cool. And it's basically written in first person as if it's a journal from someone who went out into the world, Cicely, this halfling, and found all of these little strange fruits and berries and weird fungi and huge trees and stuff like that.
And it's a lightning bolt.
Yeah. I've just realised all of those historical texts where you actually go out and you get like Darwin's notes, or you go off and you get
naturalist.
And that kind of goodness, stuff. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yep.
Like the naturalist. Wow. Think about that. Think about designing your campaign around, going out to the Galapagos. Like, you go to the Galapagos and it's a baby Tarrasque, not a turtle. Oh my gosh.
Awesome. Yeah.
I want to play that game. Sorry.
That could be the AI game.
Sorry. I just got so excited about that as an idea.
That could be the AI game. We could.
Oh my God. Kit Kat just said, related note, foraging and farm core vlogs are a major inspo for Druid. Yes. 100% yes.
I must say to you guys.
Exactly what we're talking about. A real world example of what we're talking about. So
Jared here, Kit Kat is one of my players in my campaign. Her Druid is fantastic, and it's great to hear. Thank you for that, Kit Kat. That is so cool. It's so weird. There's so many things like this out there that are influential. It's so random sometimes, or just amazing that you've never heard of. And I just want to hear it. It's so good. So that was one anyway. Have you guys had anything like that from Kickstarter or Drive-Thru RPG or anything like that that's helped support how you play games or different ideas you wanted to bring in?
I have puzzles, so I love to put puzzles in my games. But I have a small brain and generally can't think of lots and lots of puzzles. So there's a guy, DM Dave, and who's just published a whole lot of stuff on puzzles. And I've used their stuff a lot. And I find that even if I don't use exactly the puzzle, it gives me that inspiration. And riddles, books of riddles. And I think a lot of DMs do this. Like riddles.
Me too.
Some of the funny ones are, this is a riddle for children. And I swear my players spend an hour on it.
Overthinking it.
It's like, what could possibly wear down mountains over time? Look, it's water. It's water. Water.
Yeah. I love that. I love puzzles as well. Yeah.
Yeah. My bard in my Curse of Strahd campaign that I will forever be referencing until the end of time, apparently, who we might meet because I do want him to guest on the show, so you will have a chance to meet his character. But he played a very enthusiastic bard who was from wartime and was like, the supporter of this tiefling, blah blah blah, and ended up with the party in Barovia. But he would read. He is an actor by trade, so he was very method, and he had a little book of like terrible war poems. So it'd be something like half a league onward, all in the valley of death. Rode the 600, and he would just do shit like that constantly. But then his other methoding was, making sure the mute, forever armor wearing helmet fighter was okay as well because he knew he was a fellow soldier. So, little things, right? It's the little things that we bring, and that's something. Again, someone's written this little poem, but it has an impact on this game. Poetry. Yeah. How about that for literature?
Poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
but
that
I
was
mean,
called
I'm
the Charge of
thinking
the
like,
Light Brigade.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool.
yeah. Yeah, well, I'm thinking,
Yeah.
some of the more surreal stuff,
Yeah.
like Kubla Khan. Now, there's
Yeah.
a surreal poem.
Yeah.
That'll get your noodle, the noodle juices
Yeah.
flowing. If you
Right.
want to like quickly like have a beautiful perspective on something. Yeah.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
shit.
That's interesting because
And
you brought that up because Tolkien
Yeah.
also had Gawain and the Green Knight, which is an amazing poem. And if you look back at some old English poems and Viking ones, my God, some awesome stuff there. Because then you're talking about classics. You can look back at the classics and mythology as well, which have clearly influenced a lot of role-playing material. So like classic Greek stuff is out there as well.
Oh, my goodness.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think I've run an eatable campaign. I'm not sure I would.
I'm not so into that either. But some really awesomely inspiring stuff as well about the strangest of creatures that come along into those as well. But the characters, like gods are not gods. They're humans. I mean, they're called gods, but they do exactly the same thing and the worst things that humans do too. So, it's kind of fascinating.
Actually, that's interesting. And just going back to puzzles as well, because I'm thinking of some of the Greek kind of mythology puzzles.
Yeah.
I like to incorporate those into the game sometimes. Oh, my goodness, I can't even think. The knot. Whosoever shall
Glee
this
knot.
is not. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of the ideas, and I think have we talked about this before? Maybe we've talked about this before, but talking about some of the great mythology conflicts and puzzles and struggles that people have make really great themes for games.
Yeah. Because there's a depth to it too, isn't there?
Yeah,
so I
there
think
is.
There's some human truth in there. Like, well, this is I think when we talk about the hero's journey. So that's why a lot of mythology and in just classic stories like Shahrazad and the 1001 Arabian Nights. I mean, Ali Baba came from that. Aladdin came from that. The actual story around Shahrazad surviving every night by telling a different story to the king so she wouldn't be beheaded the next day and eventually turning him around so he'd be a good guy. Just fascinating. So it's like awesome stories. So classics.
And I think that kind of comes to as well as how much we're inspired by mythology, perhaps without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go back to Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology. I mean, the pantheon of D&D includes a whole lot of different deities from these, I don't want to say mythologies, from old belief systems.
Yeah.
And I think I love that. And I wonder.
We've said it before.
Yeah.
We want a Dreamtime RPG. We've said it before.
We want a Dreamtime RPG.
Man.
I mean, there are so many amazing stories, and just to have that Indigenous-led, Indigenous-influenced. Obviously, we can't do that. It's got to be Indigenous people, but it would be amazing.
Kit Kat's just mentioned a Kickstarter, the Islands of Sinuna, which is a 5e supplemental published thing, which is pre-colonial Filipino mythology. So it's on the monsters.
That's right.
Let's.
I played a solo RPG that was based around Filipino mythology. And it was great. Oh my goodness. I can't remember what it is. I will pop it up in our socials later. But it was a solo RPG based around this, and it was fantastic.
I'd love to play it.
It was so much fun. It was kind of dark and it was creepy. It was amazing. But I'm also thinking there was a TV series that came out in Australia, Clever Man, which had some...
Indigenous Australians in it. Yeah, which is like a superhero.
Yeah, it was an Indigenous superhero, but it also had the Murder, which was like can you imagine some of the creatures that could come out of that? And the connection to storytelling from, ancient Australia. Oh my God, that would be incredible. Which actually brings up an interesting point as well about what stories can we tell and what stories need to be told by the people whose story it is, which is not what we're talking about tonight, but I think that's
that's going to be a topic we need to talk about.
We should talk about,
Yeah, who can?
That would be fascinating.
It's not, it's funny because it's it's easy to you can say who can tell them, or it's like who is it best told by, and who's best to represent it in a way, because it's so much about about representation, isn't it? And because look, here's the thing as well, because you brought up about thank you Kit Kat for the Filipino inspired one, because I saw that one too. We've got to talk anyway. Maybe you should run that one. But the other thing was, I have loved, it's like influence from history and from world history. Everything we do is influenced from the stuff that we see in life as well. I grew up loving the tales of the Silk Roads, and just that whole idea of these people traveling across these roads across Asia, with caravans and camels and people who are taking goods from one place to another, meeting other people. They're doing it for survival, but also to help generate and build their own culture. But they're trading with other cultures, and things cross over. There wouldn't be pasta without noodles from China. There would, all this kind of stuff. There wouldn't be columns in Xi'an in China if they hadn't actually had Greeks coming across that direction. So I've loved it. And there's something that's come out that's a RPG that is linked to 5e, but can be its own thing. And it's called Historica Arcanum. And the first one was around the city of Crescent, which is a version of Istanbul in the past. And that it just won a couple of awards in the Annie Awards this year for RPGs. They did their second one, which was the one I wanted, that I was like, and it's the Silk Roads, and I've got it, and it's amazing. And it just is like that. The world of that time slightly shifted with magical influence across it there, and it's amazing. And I can't wait to have a look through it and just see how it can inspire other things as well. So, it's fantastic. Incredible.
There's so much out there, and I think that the way that we're talking, there's so much out there that we want to explore as explorers, players as well. There's so many things that are inspirational, and it's coming down again to something we talk about a lot, which is stories. Is TTRPGs is storytelling. That's what it is at its heart, and what. There are so many different sources that we can take that inspiration from. And I guess kind of what I'm taking from it's like the overall theme of what we're talking about tonight is that it's helpful to not be locked into, I just have to use a source book, that you can have that inspiration. Well, that's nice.
What's that?
I'm just gonna randomly hold up some D&D.
Is that a tarot card?
Cards.
Tarot cards. Perfect,
Let me get something that's a bit more specific. A beautiful what am I trying to say? Monk. Dinner scene with some humans and dwarves and halflings. It's Joan of Arc.
We haven't even talked about historical events.
Yeah.
I mean,
but how good is that? If you had a deck of cards like those with beautiful
and its iconology and the depth of that.
For inspiration for characters, literally drawing cards from a deck to go, okay, this is the kind of person you meet. That's so cool.
So Drizzt being spun up by a web.
Oh, that Drizzt. Okay,
very, very
That's so cool. Yeah. Tarot cards and cards themselves, I just like when Magic the Gathering came out, I started just literally using those as reference points for role-playing games because there were some beautiful paintings and pictures on those. Like you're talking about classical paintings. The artists that they started bringing in for that actually left a lot of D&D books for dead because they did such investment in beautiful art and it was so inspiring. So, so good.
There's so much. I mean, storytelling's art as well, right? It doesn't, I think, get the same recognition that it got years ago.
I'm just going to keep going down the inspiring card-based. I do card-based inspiration.
The rest of the content for tonight is showing cards.
It's me just holding up cards. Sorry, podcast listeners.
We'll keep the conversation going in some way.
If you want to see what we're holding up, again, not sponsored, but these are actually some local Aussie guys. They've created Chronicle cards. I met them at Oz Comic Con. They are really cool dudes. I bought their full set. I don't have my player ones, but they have a monster attributes deck. An example is resistantly resistant, resistant to good, Call of the Wild, loyal, poison. So all of these beautiful things from Lord of the Rings, now you can get them in a handy dandy. No. But also events.
We need to be sponsored because we do this so well.
We have such cool... if you want to sponsor us, that's the kind of valued message we can present to our viewers and listeners. Thank you.
So...
hey, speaking of thank yous, my most wonderful companions, we are starting to run out of time.
What?
No.
I've got one last thing if we've got a moment.
Left.
We absolutely have a moment for you, Ian.
Because you were talking about puzzles, I wanted to talk about an actual book as well that we have that as a reference.
About puzzles as well.
I really hope you guys can find this somewhere. I got this from a Berkelow's bookshop, so definitely seriously just going into a bookshop and just trawling for inspiration, you'll find amazing stuff. This was like $50, I think, and it has just books from throughout history, and so it does it in terms of timeline. So like the earliest ancient ones, it talks about these. These are classic ones, so it talks about some of the ones from mythology. As it goes into medieval times, it changes up the font and everything, so it looks it up like that. It's great, really handy, and so I've been trying to get those into some games as well, just to spice it up a bit too. Because it's like we have creativity, all of us do, but it's so none of us have the brain power, and sometimes you're good at some things.
Mimicry and flattery, isn't that what they say?
Yeah, that's right. The greatest form of flattery.
It's inspiration. It's only plagiarism if you don't acknowledge your sources. So.
I like what Basilia said, that the barbarian they have is basically based on Kamal from Magic the Gathering. So that's so cool.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
And that's it. If you guys like for play, like obviously we're talking heavily from a DM perspective, but the chat has certainly proven that obviously your individual characters can be inspired by characters, vlogs. I need to find out what farmcore vlogging is, because my dad works on the farm. I get daily photos of the cabbages and everything in the frosty New Zealand mornings right now.
Oh my goodness!
So you know what? I'm going to put my dad in a campaign. It's done, because why? I have the power to do that.
I'll put my pets in a campaign.
Yeah. And I think we're going to have to do another topic down the road about TV and film influence. TV and film influence is going to be down the road. That's another thing.
And I have actually... Yeah, I do actually sit down and watch a particular episode of something, and I write down notes. So at the moment, my biggest things have been Twisted Metal, really cool thing on Stan, post-apocalyptic, based on the PlayStation video game, and Walking Dead, Dead City. It's a refreshing take on Walking Dead, because it dragged me. And that is truly, truly good. It's nice. The characters are driven as they should have been in OG Walking Dead days, so... Yeah,
we will definitely have to do that as a topic, so I'll know in the future. So that's cool.
Absolutely. All right.
But I feel we might need to be wrapping up this amazing conversation here online on our stream. However, we can continue the conversation in our Discord.
Yes,
we have a Discord. Anyone who is not part of our Discord, please join.
Which is the channel that people should go to on Discord?
Come up in the chat soon, I imagine.
We have a channel on the Discord. It's right at the top of the lobby. It's called After Stream Hangout. Just come and chill. We'll be just doing some chatting. I don't know if I've set up the permissions right. I've just realized I'm going to go figure it out, and everyone can join. Everyone can join.
Yeah. Do we have Discord?
And if you want to add any of your sort of your inspirational books and reading material, we'd love to hear about it. Talk about things that we have as well, because it's so good to be able to share that kind of that content. So thanks for joining us again, and thanks for leading it tonight, Jared and Zia.
And thank you.
Thank you for
come along, join the Discord. We're going to have some YouTube episodes. I keep promising this every month, and I have for a long time. We have season 1 on YouTube. Season 2 will be up.
We fumbled our way through that.
Yeah. Look, we're figuring it out as we go along, which is kind of how I think my entire life around TTRPGs and DMing has been as well. Figure it out as it goes. But it has been an absolute pleasure hanging out with, obviously, you two, but also everyone in the chat. It's always a pleasure having you guys here. But I think... We do love you all, but we are back next week, are we not?
We are back next week.
Always.
Next week, we have a new topic to jump into. The topic for next week is creative ways to enhance your RPG role-playing game. Just what are creative ways to enhance, and particularly also your characters, what ways you can enhance it, what tools you use, what kind of things that you can draw on. So it's a kind of segue from what we've talked about this week. What are the things that you use to enhance your characters in your
Putting
game?
it all in practice. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think I've made a thing. There is a voice channel over here in the Discord, so I'll
Let's give it a go.
you guys over there.
Yeah.
Let's try that.
We'll see you there. Let's do that. I recommend we raid the good Quinesta. So Quinesta is another
Fantastic.
DM who's currently playing, is it Baldur's Gate? No, it's not Baldur's Gate, but it is a video TTRPG. But I recommend we go over there and say hi to the most estimable Quinn. We will be back next week.
That's
All
it.
right, I'll do the thing.
So good hanging out with you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Always a pleasure. We'll do it again.
But it is a pleasure. We love you all.
See you next
I love you
time.
guys. It is
Love you
so,
too, Tia.
I love spending my
Thank
Thursday
you,
nights
chat.
hanging out with you guys. It's lovely.
Yeah. All right.
We'll see you all around.
That's it.
It's
See you around
time.
like
Be
a
creative, everyone.
Mwah.
Bye.
We'll see you next week.